Greetings to everyone. I'm so glad that you're able to join us today. For those that are watching on YouTube and Facebook, or for those of you that might just be watching this in our archived videos on our YouTube playlist, it is such a pleasure to welcome you to this conversation. I am connecting again for a second time, which is an absolute joy, with a very good friend of mine. And you know, Francesca, I realized I think I completely butchered your last name in the first conversation that we had because I always want to say, is it
Mejia.
Mejia?
It's Mejia. Yeah.
Mejia. And I think I said like Mejia or something. I said something absolutely ridiculous. So I apologize. I wanted to apologize because I should have just been humbled and said, now, wait a minute. How can I say this correctly? So Franchesca Mejia, who I have known now, I think for going on like 3 or 4 years, we connected professionally through some conferences and just started talking to each other as colleagues. And then I was very grateful to be able to connect with her as she was developing her program and talking about new things she was doing, and just became a huge fan of her work and her advocacy for the arts. And so in our first conversation, if you didn't have a chance to see that, you can actually check it out in the archived videos. We were talking about advocacy, particularly surrounding returning to schools, specifically for music teachers, but really just for all educators and everyone involved in that decision-making process: parents, community leaders, administrators, educators, students. Just what does that look like and what's happening? At the end of that conversation, which flew by as they always do, I had her make a promise that she'd be able to come back and talk to us again, and she graciously agreed. So we are now right at the precipice. I know that so many people have gone back to school, but up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I know where my family's living in Texas, a lot of people are returning on right after Labor Day on Tuesday. And so I wanted to check in and be able to talk to Franchesca about some of the work that she's been doing and experiences she's been having as we plan to return to school with appropriate social distancing practices, keeping each other safe, and trying to reimagine the possibilities of what we do in the music classroom and in other disciplines. I have some things that I wanted to update, some sort of crazy models that I've heard of. And I say crazy both as a judgment and in wonderment of the creativity that I've seen. I think there's some extraordinary examples of how campuses and communities have gotten creative about how to engage students online and how to make them most successful. But then I've seen some other things. Forgive me for my judgment, but I'm just being candid that I just thought I don't understand this. I don't know where it's coming from and how it's going to lead to student success. So I want to be able to talk about some of those things. It might be something you're experiencing in your own community. As always, I really want to encourage you to be a part of this conversation. You might see two people on the screen, but we want to know what you think. So please post your comments and questions through Facebook or through YouTube. Both of those will end up showing up for us as we are going through our talk. Anyone that might be new to this, Teacher Talks was a venture that I started over 5 months ago now. When the pandemic first hit and my university shut down, I didn't have face-to-face contact with my students. I wanted a chance to still connect with them and get them to be thinking about music and education and the arts. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the privilege of serving as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Activities at Seattle Pacific University. So I train future educators in the arts. And so we started, had a few episodes. I had foolishly assumed that this would only last into the summer, but now we are on our, I think this is the 24th episode. So it's been about 24 weeks, and I am so grateful for the incredible resources that my institution allows me to have, and to connect with colleagues all over the world through technology, and just keep these talks going, keep these conversations going about the arts and education and the opportunities and benefits that it brings us as human beings. This is great uniting factor of the arts to allow us to be able to connect with each other and enjoy the world in unique ways. So that is where the Teacher Talks are coming from. It's sponsored by the Falcon Feathers. This is a student organization. Feathers stands for the Future Educators in the Arts, Transforming Human Experience and Realities. It's quite an acronym. So this is a student organization of future educators and art disciplines, and this is one of the things that we provide in our community, which is continuing to grow thanks to technology. And so again, thank you for those of you that might be joining us for the first time, for those that are coming back for part 2 of this conversation, or just coming back to hear another talk. Please feel free to get involved, post your comments and questions. I'll be monitoring those and bringing sending them in when I can. Seattle Pacific University is a Christian institution of higher education. And so I like to begin the conversations with just a brief moment of prayer, of reflection, whatever prayer looks like for you, however you want to participate in that. I just want to take a quick moment before I turn it over to Franchesca for some updates to just sort of center ourselves. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the beauty of the time that you give us, the time that we have the opportunity to invest and hopefully grow closer to your will for us in our lives. Help us to be servants. Help us to be humbled by the challenges that we are all facing. Thank you for the continued blessing of resources and of friendships and of colleagues that are fighting with us together to provide the best opportunities possible for our students and our communities. Thank you for the administrators and leaders at every level that are fighting to make sure that we ensure equity and inclusion in every classroom for every student and educator that is involved in the educative process. We are so grateful for your continued blessings and your guidance. And we pray that it continues through this extraordinary time that you are bringing us through, and particularly for those of us that are returning to the classroom in this next week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, my goodness, I have been following you on social media, and so I know you have been incredibly busy, but I want to just open it up to you. I mean, talk to us. How have you been, and what has been going on around approaching, this week, returning to the classroom?
Yeah, so I've been a lot quieter on social media, and we can talk about that. I know I mentioned a little bit before, like, there's definitely a lot of monitoring educators on social media right now of like posting during the workday. So I've been like, I realize how much I post during the day now that I have to like not, and I can't. So I've been a little more quiet. But so we go back, we had a calendar change. It was voted on the school board. Our students were supposed to come back on Friday, this coming Friday, the 11th, but they didn't want them to come back on a Friday. They wanted them to start like a fresh week. So there was a calendar change voted by our school board to make Friday a professional development day. They just took one from March, later in the spring and swapped it out. So now we have professional development on campus on Friday. So teachers have been home teaching this whole time. And so now we're going to go back on Friday, and the students will come back on the 14th. My personal opinion is we are not.
Wait, can I, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to clarify. So school has started, but you've been online?
Yeah, so school started
Wow, okay.
and we've been doing distance teaching. So we did 4 whole weeks of distance learning for the students. So teachers and students were learning and teaching from home. Teachers could choose if they wanted to go into campus or if they wanted to stay home. I chose to go into campus for the first about week and a half, and then I chose to stay home and do the teaching from home. But now we'll go back. All teachers are required to go back unless they've had the ADA approval, which has been expanded for COVID. If you're a vulnerable individual, all of that approval really goes through HR, dependent on what your physician writes in that document that the district makes up. And you turn that in. So unless you're ADA or you have like alternative work arrangement, you could turn that in for approval for teachers, which essentially really means they're going to put you somewhere else on the campus. This is what I've kind of, my understanding has been, is like, you won't be in the classroom teaching those kids that are in person. You might be somewhere else doing distance learning, like secluded on the campus, but you're still going to be asked to come to campus. Students
and
are
to
back
clarify,
on
with those ADA compliances, a moment of praise is due, because I think it's great that a lot of employers are taking advantage of that and giving people options. My school is doing that. You do have an option. Now, to be fair, we don't have any paperwork. It has been applied liberally, which I think is really good. So it's completely up to the educators whether or not we feel comfortable being on campus. And we have that opportunity, but I'm you can tell I'm struggling. I'm really trying to be optimistic and positive about it, but one of the negative things I've heard about, which really frustrates me, is that a lot of these ADA forms only apply to individuals and individuals' health and don't take into consideration individual communities. So if you have an elderly parent living at home, or if your children are in at a high risk, is that correct, that the form only applies to you?
Yes, and it only applies to you because you are the vulnerable individual. And when we're talking about elderly or maybe parent or children that are high risk, that's where that expanded FMLA would kind of come into play. But even that is a big juggling act. Now, I try to be optimistic, and I love your optimism, and I love that it seems like the university there is like giving it liberally. We
Yes.
had we've had quite a few educators as of Friday, right, the end of a workday before a 3-day long weekend, call me, post on social media, tell a friend that eventually got back to me. It turns out a lot of our educators were approved ADA, those ADA accommodations, because they are vulnerable and because they're high risk. And on Friday, at the end of the workday, HR gave them calls and rescinded their ADA accommodation. Yeah, yes. Which is
So
absurd.
rescinded them, in other words, saying you have to come into work or you're forfeiting your
You have to come
position.
into work. And a lot of it's like, because you're a singleton teacher, because you're dual language. Like for me, I teach orchestra. Like nobody could really take over what I'm
Yeah.
doing, for those face-to-face students. Because remember, students got to choose in Texas, and parents got to choose whether or not they wanted their kid face-to-face learning or distance learning. So we're not bringing everybody back in, but we're bringing up to 25%, which is right now the county
Oh,
uh,
wow. Like
max
mandate, or yeah.
capacity. But what's really unfortunate is that 25% does not include staff, which really upsets me, because I'm thinking if we're trying to be safe and you're trying to keep the numbers low, then you want to count the building capacity, including the staff on the building. But we're not doing that in our district. And I'm not quite sure if that's actually happening everywhere too in Texas. My biggest issue is that with the waiver with TEA in Texas, we could have the 8 weeks of distance learning, but there's a lot of, back and forth about the interpretation of that waiver, a lot of dialogue and disagreements that are going on with district superintendents and school boards, and then the general public. Like, it says we can do it. So technically, you can be in distance learning for 8 weeks as long as you're serving students that don't have internet or technology, that there is some on-campus learning. So if we really wanted health and safety as our primary goal, we could bring some students back, like those high need students, and still have a very low number of people on campus. But what's happening in my district and in other districts is that, oh, we can have 25% in our county, then let's try and max out that 25%. Like, let's get as many people on campus as we can, which is an issue. And honestly, that 25% is only going to last for the next 2 weeks, and then it's going to go up to 50%. So now we can bring more kids onto campus. So, yeah.
And that timeline, of course, is ridiculous, because to say that it's going to change in 2 weeks, I mean, you cannot exhibit symptoms for 2 weeks. So literally, by the time you decide to bring 50% of your population back, if you only have a 2-week window, you could be bringing them back right at the time that people would be most infectious.
And not to mention, we're coming out of a holiday weekend. Are
Yeah.
we really bringing kids back within the 2 weeks after a holiday weekend, or even teachers, and that's another issue that's come up is, this expectation that, teachers for the most part are staying safe. Yeah, people have their own personal independent values and ideas, and they can do whatever they want to do. For the most part, we're all very concerned about our safety. I'm not going out to wherever and hanging out in public all the time, but there seems to be this other dialogue amongst parents that are very much like pro face-to-face learning, as well as some district leadership across the state that like, oh, well, teachers just want to go out and party and they want to be able to have this free time. We had a school board meeting 2 weeks ago, they called a special meeting, and this was about that calendar change, right? They took the Friday before spring break right? And they swapped it for this Friday. So we have to work that Friday. And a parent called in concerned about that. But when our superintendent, addressed it, he didn't even address the parent. He addressed the teachers. Well, teachers can't be going on cruises during spring break this year. And so it just blew our minds to think, is this what our leadership really thinks of us? Is this what our leadership really thinks we're doing? We just want this free time and we don't really care about safety. We just want to cry safety so we can stay home. But in reality, we have teachers are resigning. They're leaving. More teachers are leaving every day. And I guarantee you, Chris, like once we're back on the 14th, we're going to see a mass exodus of educators when they're back in the classroom with those students. And when we're talking about, is this safe or not? Trying to say this eloquently. When you have transparent communication as an establishment, so the school district, if you had transparent communication about something very important, like the reopening of public schools during the age of COVID, and everything was out there at all times, what are the ventilation systems? What's the upgrade? How is the cleaner going to work? What exactly is in the cleaners that are going to work? When you have this, then there's not as much speculation, there's not as much questioning, and there's not as much fear. Because now, we know they're going to spray the rooms down with BioProtect, but now there's messaging out there like BioProtect's company and their product actually doesn't really kill viruses. They're in research now for that. So is this really going to help us? We're going to have wipes to wipe down the desks between class periods, but you only need to use 2 wipes per class period, because it's supposed to work with the BioProtect, but you don't want to do it too much because it might wipe it off and so it's like each campus has like different miscommunications to teachers. Teachers talk to each other and they're like, your admin said this. Your admin said don't buy an air purifier because it could mess up the BioProtect, but your admin, told you that you have to wear gloves when you use these wipes, when my admin said I didn't have to wear gloves because they're okay to use. That's the problem. It's not about, it's just, I get ahead of myself when I talk at 1,000 miles an hour, but things are so unclear. The plans are so unclear.
Well, inconsistent.
Yeah. And the district, it's so funny because I talk about it all the time. It's like our district and many other districts, like this is not unique to my district, but there are a lot of things going on in Pflugerville that we could chat about at another time. All public, all on YouTube at their public board meetings. You can see it. But it's funny because, we saw how the state played plausible deniability, right? Oh, whatever the districts need to do, but here's some mandates, but, it's not up to us, it's up to the district. And now you can kind of see the districts are playing the same game. Oh, well, the campuses are going to come up with their own safety plan. Here's ours, like universal one, but you're going to come up with your own campus safety plan. And I sat on that reentry task force for the district in the summer, which in my personal opinion was a wash. Like the fact that I was one of very few teachers amongst a whole bunch of central office admin spoke volumes to, the input and the value of teacher and parent opinion. But I think about the work we did in that, and now I look what all of these campuses are doing. They're having to come up with their own like campus plan, and they're coming up with their own ideas about stuff, and it's all different from campus to campus. And I'm thinking like, where's the consistency? Where's the accountability? Who's accountable? If these things are followed through with, right? Is it the district? Is it the campus admin? Is it the teacher? We're just doing what we're told from campus. The campus admin are doing what they're told from district, but all of the messaging is inconsistent. And that's what's so scary about going back right now. When the positivity rates are still up, we've plateaued in Travis County, but I mean, that's great and all, but let's put kids back in classrooms and see what happens. And it's hard to get people to look at that future perspective of community spread. Like, yeah, things might be great right now, but that doesn't mean we all need to go to the beach, which they're going to Lake Pflugerville and hanging out. It's just...
Yeah. And it's that without creating some sort of a cliche example, and again trying to use more positive analogies, it's that butterfly effect and how ignorant people seem to be to that, and then holding yourself accountable to how connected you are. Because this was, a conversation that I got to muse with another colleague, that the people that are incredibly confident, believe that they're healthy, and feel good about returning to campus or into their community with quote unquote normal activity, it's great that you feel that way. And it's great that you might be asymptomatic. And so for you, you're like, no big deal. Like, I've got COVID, or I contracted it, or my partner had it, but I'm not experiencing any symptoms. It's not a big deal. And from that individual experience, you create this stigma around the social distancing practices and the safety measures, in terms of, it wasn't that bad, I had it and it's no big deal. And it's like, okay, it's great, you are truly lucky, and you are in the majority of people within certain age ranges that are asymptomatic or don't have truly negative effects, that when they contract the virus. But then you think about, as an educator who is in contact with hundreds of children every day, that you give it to this child who takes it home and their grandmother passes away. Or you
Gosh.
give it to this child and their parent who just had heart surgery 5 years ago, who is at risk, they lose their father. Like, that to me is the thing that bothers me in the rhetoric, in the conversations. It's, well, we're being too careful, and if you look at the statistics, it only affects so many people, and the people that are dying are marginalized members of the community that were already at risk, and this that. And it's like, yeah, but you are, as you just pointed out, who is held accountable? You are a part of that problem if you are ignoring those guidelines, going into public, being a carrier, and not taking responsibility of that. Is lately what has been bothering me the most, is that people believe they are completely autonomous, and it's so irresponsible. And it that's one of my biggest fears, is that I am going to find out from one of my students, not, and I say this sincerely, I think some people have been surprised to hear me articulate it this way. I have had colleagues and friends that I know have had students that have passed away from COVID complications, which is devastating. And my fear at this point is not so much that I will lose a student. Of course, I'm afraid of that. I am more concerned about my students losing family members or close friends, because I happen to be the catalyst. I was the person that went from classroom to classroom, from room to room. It was teaching in all these places, and brought that in. That, it terrifies me that I'm going to be the reason that this got transferred to someone. I'm not going to experience, I'm asymptomatic or whatever the situation might be, but to know that I would have been a part of that, I think that is terrifying to think of.
I get really emotional when you talk about that, because that is such a big problem with me and with so many other educators, is this idea of like, and we mentioned in our last chat, like, a lot of my students live in multi-generation housing,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you got aunts and uncles. We could see entire families get wiped out. Kids go home with more than just homework. And when Trump, declared teachers as essential workers, that was what, 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
that was a blow, because what that meant is now teachers can't utilize that COVID leave when they are exposed. They can utilize it if they get it and test positive, but if they're exposed, I have a positive case in my classroom that was next to me or coughed on me, or another colleague, I don't get to go home. I get to, unless I'm exhibiting symptoms, right? So now what are we doing? Now your kid is in a classroom with a teacher who's been exposed to COVID, who could very much have it, highly contagious virus, who's asymptomatic, but is still contagious. I
Yeah.
just thought that was the most asinine thing that's out there. Like, we are putting children at risk, and they're going to go home and put you at risk as a parent. Yet we still have parents that are chomping at the bit and trying to knock the wall down to get their kid back into the classroom. Round Rock ISD had a massive parent protest. I think it was last week, leading up to their board meeting, about getting their kid back into the classroom. Our kids need the social development that comes from in-person learning. Our kids need the interaction. Well, guess what? That's not going to happen on campus. Your kid's not going to get social development. Your kid is going to be further traumatized. They're going to see a teacher in a face mask, in a face shield, potentially a whole gown and gloves. That's who they're going to interact with every day. They're not going to talk to their friends. They're not going to hug their friends. They're not going to be anywhere near their friends. They're going to be policed in the classroom, policed in the hallway, policed at lunchtime, policed on the playground, policed. You don't get to go to the bathroom today. You don't get to go to the water fountain because this is a serious thing and these are our safety protocols that we have to follow. There's no social development in that. They will be traumatized. So when we talk about bringing it into the classroom and getting kids sick and getting these families sick, I feel like a lot of times, Chris, I'm like talking to a wall when I try to express these things. And I get really emotional because I think about, I still hear, people are dying from COVID. I have a great colleague. I love him to death. And he's had 3 of his friends die from COVID in the last week, and it's hurt him so much. And this is a teacher who has to go back into the classroom, who I'm sure is terrified. My family, I live with people. So that I get terrified because I live with people. I call them my family. I have housemates. It's cheaper to rent a house than an apartment. And I get terrified because am I going to bring it home to them when my family member, his whole family got it in San Antonio, got COVID, and his grandfather died from COVID. And I think about what burden am I going to be placing on my family that I live with because now I'm going into that space. I'm maybe contracting it from wherever it's at. And we can't blame people for having it, but we can hold people responsible for not, like you said, following those safety measures, keeping the social distancing, wearing a mask. How easy is it? It sucks. We all know it sucks. We don't want to do it. But what an easy way to keep people safe and show that you have the love and the respect for others. It's a pretty terrifying reality knowing that I come back to it again. And I was in this webinar yesterday and they were talking about teachers. This janitor, this bus driver, this teacher died from complications of COVID. And I'm thinking, this is not gone, guys. Just because we're comfortable going to the grocery store or because they opened up the park and you guys want to go out and hang out, it's still here. And it's only going to get worse when we bring kids and staff onto campus. And I have such an issue with my particular district to say, we can bring 25% on campus. So we're going to bring all 25% on. Why? Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
The amount of kids.
Especially knowing that you guys have already been teaching online. That's what surprises me. Like, why bringing people back?
And it's working. There's always the learning curve for technology. There is going to be the issues. Well, you are going to have the kids who don't have the technology, the internet access. Bring those kids. We're required by the state to bring those kids on campus. Bring them. The least amount of kids. Yes, it's going to take a little while to get used to the schedule. And I don't blame parents for feeling the way they do when it comes to I have to work. I can't take care of my second grader. And we understand that. But that's also not our job as a teacher to solve that problem. It's not. That's just showing you how unprepared our society was for something like this. And for as many parents that are rising up and screaming and yelling for in-person teaching, where were you at the last legislative session when we were marching to the Capitol for better funding? Because if maybe you showed up there, we would have had the funding to be ready for this pandemic, and we could have been open since March if we had the funding. And I think that's where people miss the entire boat is this is a huge problem. But if we had the proper funding to run public education as it should be run, we would have been prepared for this. We would have been able to have kids on campus in small groups with lots of teachers, lots of staff, lots of facilities, more classroom, more space to space kids out. We would have had the money for PPE and plexiglass for every desk and every teacher desk. We don't even have plexiglass. We're going in without plexiglass in our classrooms. And people wonder why teachers are freaking out. It's this idea that like, oh, they just want that free time at home. Are you kidding? Distance learning is the worst thing for me. I have a really hard time, but I do it, and I do it really well because I want it to be a positive experience for my kids. But I so badly want to get them back in the classroom, but I'm not naive to the severity of this virus. Therefore, I will stay in distance learning for my kids and myself.
Well, and here's unpopular opinion time, but I think that this is a reality that everybody knows. I don't even want to restrict this to teaching. Again, running the risk of sounding over judgmental or generalizing too much. We've all had that job where you recognize there are people that work and people that don't work, right? People that know how to game the system. They know how to clock in right at the round of time so they can come in at the last minute and still get their full hours. They know how to do just the bare minimum so that the task is completed, but it wasn't done with fidelity. Like, I don't care where you're working. We have all experienced those people, right? So that same thing happens in education, just like it does in any other avenue. It happens in education. And I can distinctly remember engaging with colleagues that frustrated me. I mean, sincerely frustrated me because they did the bare minimum. They did what was absolutely required of them. And the people that lost out were their students. Of course, it didn't affect them. They were able to check all the boxes. They never landed on the radar of any administrators to hold them accountable. And so they did what they did. And I think we've all had those experiences. We all had that educator. And usually in middle school or high school, as students, we're a little more cognizant of our learning. But everybody has that, like, oh my gosh, I remember this math teacher. I remember this, whatever the example is that, and no disrespect to math teachers. Some of the math teachers I know are extraordinary educators. So whatever discipline, I'll pick on myself. Like, I had this music teacher that just, never did anything. I remember, here's a horror story. I remember hearing about there was a music educator in Central Texas that was getting ready to retire. And in her last 2 years of working, every period, she was an elementary school teacher, she had the kids play garage band. Now, the kids loved the class, but she literally would plug them into a TV and go sit at her desk, and she would tell people, I'm getting ready to retire. Well, there was no system of accountability. No one ever cared. The kids had a good time. They were safe and enjoying themselves, although they weren't learning music. I mean, they weren't actually. It's one thing if you were using GarageBand as a tool to teach musical concepts, but it was literally just free time. And it totally flew under the radar for years. And it was like, oh my God. I mean, I was absolutely gobsmacked that happened, right? Because like you, I'm thinking, no, it's hard, but I want to do my best for my students. I want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. So that's my way of trying to couch this statement that the administrators or community members that are making this argument that quote unquote teachers just want to stay home or want to be able to do it. This is the most difficult time I've ever had teaching. It takes me so much more time to teach online than it has ever taken me to develop a lesson or a curriculum for that matter when I was teaching in person. So I have been angry. There are a few things that really anger me, but when I hear these people, well, teachers just want a free break. I have spent more time this summer in department meetings and meetings than I have had in my entire teaching career because we're trying to prepare and trying to serve our students best. So it blows my mind that people somehow look at this, this facade, this sort of cultural, social facade of the house, the home, as this place of, like safety and disclosure and like you're just at home and so you don't work because you're at home. And I'm literally broadcasting from my dining room table. Like I've had to turn my house into a workplace and I work constantly because I'm not protected. There is no invisible wall now between where I work and where I live. So I have resented that so much. Yes, there are teachers that are taking advantage of this, but that does not mean that we take this to take all other educators and claim that all other educators are lazy or taking advantage of the system. Rather, we need to hold those individual educators accountable and say, you are not doing enough. You are not doing your job with fidelity. And I digress because this really could blow up into a bigger conversation because I think we're seeing the exact same thing with protests. with the Black Lives Matter movement. We're going to pick these few examples of people that are breaking the law and then magnify that to everybody that's a part of this. Yeah, why don't we ask the question that's important? Why are we protesting? What are the social injustices and tragedies that we're witnessing? Let's not look at the educators that are not doing their job with fidelity and say that all educators are lazy. Why don't we ask, why is that teacher not being held accountable? Why is the account so weak that the teacher can get away with doing so little? And again, magnify it into any political arena, any community arena. There are always those people. The bigger question is, how do we address those deficiencies and still maintain standards that benefit the community? And that to me is the conversation I've yet to see happening.
It's so funny that you bring up my favorite word, and it's accountability. And I think I said it earlier several times, but when it comes to my passion of public education and social justice in public education, I always come back to that word, accountability. Who's holding these individuals accountable, right? And then if it's admin that's not holding these individuals accountable, you're talking about the root of the problem, right? If it's admin not holding these individuals accountable, then what is admin having to do, and what duties and undue burdens are being placed on them where maybe they are not able to hold that person accountable? So now we're going up to the district level.
Amen.
District doing to these campus admin where they are so inundated with tasks that they don't even know how to complete? When they ask questions, they don't get answers, right? I mean, I can't imagine, because right now that we're making this transition into on campus, they're having to redo the whole master schedule because kids will get new teachers to balance out the in-person learning. I mean, something that takes months of summer to do, now they're going to have to do in a week, right? So the accountability levels just get higher and higher up, and who's really holding people accountable? Who are the people who hold the people accountable? It's it really bothers me, and I think that's where we find a lot of the injustice in our social and racial justice pieces. We find a lot of issues there because people aren't holding accountable. Who is holding those police officers accountable, right? And I don't even want to open up that conversation, but it's just
well, no, but I'm glad you bring that up, because to that effect, without people making assumptions in this conversation, this is not some, left-wing socialist agenda. I think I can legitimately say this spans any political arena, and I reference it, but I think it's important to articulate the example. I do not hate all police officers. Furthest thing from it. I think that law enforcement have one of the most difficult tasks in society writ large. However, it does not give those officers that are breaking the law, that are murdering people of color, or just murdering people in general because they're not well trained or fun enough, or it doesn't give them a pass. Just as much as it doesn't give educators that are not going to do their job with fidelity a pass because everybody else is working hard enough. And just like with a local politician, if your mayor is doing an extraordinary job, but your city council members are not following through with ratifying the appropriate measures that need to be put into place to protect your community, you need to hold them accountable. So it doesn't, if you're Republican or Democrat, whatever your political persuasion is, whatever it is, it spans that. We have people that game the system, that try to take advantage of it, and we need to hold those people accountable. It doesn't mean that we burn them at the stake. It doesn't mean that we fire them. We need to reevaluate the system and put those measures in place so we can still survive. I mean, I would hope the conversation transitions from survival to thriving. I want to thrive, and the resources and the opportunities exist. But as long as we have, and I know you've experienced this, Franchesca, it's like everybody knows it. And it's that taboo thing. It's like this big, Thanksgiving family dinner where it's like, oh, well, we all know that, that person shouldn't be drinking wine right now, but we're just going to let it pass. Like, oh no, we all know that that educator doesn't pull their weight, and they're not doing what they're supposed to, and they don't give feedback to their students at the right time. We all know that that person isn't doing what they're supposed to do, but oh, that person, oh, it's just that's just who they are. And that's just ridiculous.
This really brings me back to our last conversation, and we talked politics and elections, and we talked about our state representative doesn't know what's the problem unless I tell them the problem. And I
Yep.
think this goes to what you're saying with accountability. Like, we have to hold people accountable, and that's our job. And if it means that my superintendent's doing something and my school board isn't holding him accountable, then it's my job as a voter in the district to hold that school board member accountable for their lack of holding him accountable. And that's what I'm saying. There's all these different levels of accountability that we actually have to be aware of and where they're directed. And it segues really well into the conversation about elections. The elections are coming up, and we're fighting this reopening so hard because it's terrifying and it's not transparent, and we're not really sure what the safety measures are. Again, I do not have plexiglass in my classroom. The HEB worker at the grocery store has plexiglass at the cash register. So please stop comparing me to the HEB worker, because that's the big one right there, right? Grocery store workers have been back at their job, but teachers are afraid. Well, there's a lot more safety protocol at the grocery store than there is at a campus
Right.
time. So, we're trying to fight this, and we're trying to fight the district, and we're trying to fight the school board, and we're trying to get the school board to listen. These videos of these school board meetings are entertainment if you just watch them, and you're just thinking, like, what are these people doing? Like, are they not listening to the 60 people that just called in crying and sharing from the heart, like the pain and the fear and these concerns, legitimate concerns? The air ventilation system is not actually at CDC recommendation for COVID-19, all these different pieces. And, then they still just don't listen, right? So are we going to keep fighting, or am I going to now focus my efforts to, okay, I get it now. I'm going to have these 3 people running for these 2 seats to get you off that school board, because that's the accountability. I will hold you accountable. I will tell you what I need. I will tell you what the issues are. And if you don't listen and you don't follow through with what the majority of your community is saying, that's fine. I will have someone else be elected for your spot then. And that's how it goes, to me at least. And that's how it's going to go in the House for Texas, and that's going to be how it goes for the presidential election. Like, that's accountability too. You want to hold people accountable? Go vote in November.
Well, and I think it's worth saying, again, I know this is unpopular opinion. Educating people in any society, in any country, requires investment of time, of resources. It is work. And there is and again, I want to be clear. It's not that I offer these prefaces not necessarily to protect myself, but to offer clarification so that people don't weaponize my words. My daughter is starting kindergarten this year, and we're doing it online. We're starting online, and the district that we're living in, we're just south of Seattle in Tukwila. They're struggling on how they're returning and what that's going to look like, and it's been slow moving, and we've been frustrated because we want answers, and so we're going through that process. And so I'm putting on that lens of being a parent. I have to invest in my daughter's education. It is irresponsible of me as a member of society, as a citizen in my community, to say, from 7:45 to 3:15, I just get to kick you onto the bus and you're someone else's responsibility. And when you come home, I expect you to be educated. Now, I am not negating the incredible weight of responsibility that so many parents and families have, especially, these non-nuclear, non-traditional families, which I think is a misnomer. I think it's unfair to label that. But, families that don't have 2 income earners, or families that have extended situations and circumstances, that might be in a house that needs repair, or might be in an at-risk environment or neighborhood, or there are all of these contributing factors that I don't think that it's a matter of you have to teach your child. Like, you're working 2 jobs, you're trying to keep the rent paid and the lights on. Like, I get it. It's not that. But the accountability piece is work. And that's what frustrates me, is this, it's this arrogance, if you will, that in general, my experiences in the United States has been, it is someone else's responsibility to educate my child and everything that goes with that. And it's like, well, wait a minute. We do have a lot of responsibilities as educators and administrators within the public school system. We have a lot of responsibilities to you because we receive tax dollars. And you do get to hold this accountable. You do pay into this system. So 100%, all of that is true. However, the big caveat, and we talked about this last time, you have to respond to the emails. You have to call in when you get the voicemails. You have to respond because you are creating that chasm of what your needs are. And then we have to make the assumptions. So we are going to assume for you. And then you come 5 months later, well, that's not what I wanted. Did you respond to any of the emails? You never called me back. You never told me how many teachers have been in this situation. I don't understand why my son is failing. You don't? I've sent you 7 emails and called you 12 times and written letters to you and sent them home. And well, I've never seen any of that. This is the contact information you provided us when you registered for school. I don't know how else to communicate with you that your student was at risk and here were the interventions that we tried. And now it's too late. It can't be too late. You're giving up on my kid. And we get into this and it becomes so treacherous and divisive. And it's like, wait a minute. You can't just send your kids to school and assume that everything is okay. You have to be a part of that. And I've told this is why it's a public school system. Parents and the community are a part of the system. It's not just on campus or at the central office or wherever it is. And that's the thing that I think people struggle with is they don't either feel the need or the desire, which are two different things, to be engaged and be a part of that dialogue about their kids' education.
There's so many things I want to say to this piece, but I want to go directly from what you just said, the need or desire, or sometimes the invitation. And I feel like
True.
working in public education, I've seen the places in the instances, not only in my district, but in other districts and other states, like in Georgia, because I come out of Cobb County, Georgia, and where, it's almost like you don't see that campus really giving the invitation to the parent to be a big part of it. Yeah, there's the checkbox, but an email won't suffice, right? You got to call. You got to send that letter because maybe they don't have the number in. But I have like this beautiful big dream of, public schools being community schools. When are we going to start making public schools community centers where the parents can come and take English classes if we have a very high ELL population, where the parents can come and maybe even the high school kids can come after school and take finance classes. Like, when are we going to start utilizing our public school system to really serve the community at large and not just the kids? Because now what we're seeing in terms as it relates to what you're saying is COVID has showed us, and I don't know if we talked about this last time, but I've talked about this a lot. COVID has showed us truly exactly what you said, is that you have a lot of parents that have just been like, oh, well, school is where my kid goes while I go to work. School's where my kid goes. They feed them 3 meals a day, and then I don't have to worry about them. And then they come back and I put them to bed, and then we wake up and then my kid goes to school. And then I keep thinking about, well, did you forget that when you have a child that you're accountable for that child? You're accountable for their success, their growth, their health. I'm a very quick story. So during COVID, and we had the kind of expanded unemployment benefits, right? The $600.
Yes.
$600 a week. So my mother got onto that. And she was sharing, there's like a Facebook group of how to like bypass all of the roadblocks, because people are thinking, oh, there's draining the unemployment with that extra $600 a week. Do you know how hard it was to actually get unemployment during the pandemic? It was almost impossible. You would call in and they say, we're not taking calls. But if you knew the secret to keep pressing star or keep pressing whatever, then you could finally get to someone. Like, that's how it was. And she showed me, she's on his Facebook page or group, and there's people commenting because, they were taking it away at the end of July, and somebody commented, and it made me a little upset because, like, what are we doing to help? What are we really doing to help? Someone said, well, I'm going to need $1,200 a month if you're not going to take my kid back onto campus because you need to feed my kid. And my brain instantly went to like, wait, I understand the struggle. I understand there are people working several jobs and having to survive to put food on the table, but we were not meant to actually take over the parenting and the rearing responsibilities of adolescents. That's not what the public school system was meant to do. It was meant to enlighten, facilitate learning and education, and grow your child's brain. Now we provide food, which is beautiful. We provide free lunch, and now we're providing free breakfast. A lot of campuses are providing all 3 meals. A lot of districts have the weekend buddy bags where they fill the backpacks full of food for the weekend. All beautiful programs to help our society. But when are we turning it on its side now and putting this unreasonable amount of responsibility on educators like myself and my colleagues? It's not necessarily my job to solve the world's problems or completely raise your child. And that's what we're seeing from this. Like, when are we going to shift responsibility and accountability? Yes, we can feed, we can take care of, but this is not just the public school system. This is your city council. This is your county systems. This is your state systems. Like, this cannot just fall under public school. And that's what's happening because of COVID. It's like all of a sudden public schools are going to have to save the world with all of these things. Well, did you know we were already kind of doing it to begin with like 100,000 responsibilities? It's not our responsibility to solve this problem. It is a group responsibility between communities, state government, local government, federal government. But everyone, again, I said it before, everyone's playing this plausible deniability game. Federal government, districts, campuses, teachers, just do whatever. Well, then now who's accountable? Who's going to get fired when your kid doesn't learn or doesn't pass or gets COVID in my class? It's pretty absurd the amount of pressure that's getting put on teachers outside of the fear of getting sick. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, absolutely.
Get sick. But now I'm also afraid of, like, am I going to get in trouble if I'm not following the TEKS to the, which are the texts, right? To the standard, because I'm doing distance learning. We're not playing in orchestra. We're playing on Tuesdays. We play on Tuesdays. What we're doing is we're talking about music and how it correlates with social justice and personal understanding and deep contextual, things.
Yeah.
I can move away from performance, but I still have UIL in the spring, right? Am I going to get a bad rating because I got bad ratings at UIL because I couldn't fulfill every single standard? And not to mention, when I go back on the 14th, I have in person while simultaneously teaching the kids that are so
I was going to ask that. So they're still going to have sort of a hybrid model. So you'll have some people in class and then you still have to be providing for students online.
Yeah, I'll have the kids that chose face-to-face up to 25%, and I'll have the kids that are still in distance learning at the same time.
But how are they going to navigate that for all of the performing arts? Because if it's only 25% of the campus, what if it just so happens that within that 25%, all of your orchestra students come back?
So they would have to, well, I guess because I can't really say, to be clear, I would assume because I'm a singleton, they would have to do the point system to pick and choose those kids. Or they would have somebody watch those kids while they just sat on their laptop. Because a lot of campuses in Pflugerville, we're not doing it. It's not district-wide. Austin ISD, I could be wrong. Austin ISD and Lake Travis, I know, are doing it to where when they go back, the kids stay in the classroom all day on their laptop and continue distance learning just on campus, right?
I've heard about that. Yeah. I'm glad you brought it up too, because I wanted to talk about some of those models that we've seen. And I want to honor how eloquent, I mean, arguably poetic, what you said was. I think that was a perfect sort of summation of the conversation we've been having. And I wanted to thank you for it about accountability. And it was just so well said. I can't believe it's on. We've got like 5 minutes left. And so I wanted to talk about this, some of the models that we're seeing. So you've been talking about what's happening in Pflugerville. I have also heard of schools that are doing, this is not what they're calling it, but for lack of a better description, they're doing sort of these mini mesters. So they're bringing students back in person, but they're again doing 25% of the students, and so they're giving like 25% of the students come in, and they have their regular schedule, but they only have it for 4 weeks, and then it rotates out, and then the next 4 weeks they take these other classes so that they can practice all, and then the other people are learning online, which blew my mind because several this is happening in Washington in a lot of districts, because several educators have mentioned, oh yeah, I'm not going to see my my varsity orchestra, my chamber orchestra, until December.
Wow.
Like, we won't meet until then because right now I'm rotating through the other classes, and we have just a couple weeks, and then I rotate into the next class, which was blowing my mind. Another structure that I heard of in Texas, which I hope this is not true. I hope this isn't happening. Supposedly, students were going to come to campus between 8 and noon and only have their math, social studies, language arts, and science courses for like 30 or 45 minutes each. And then they were going to leave at noon, and the afternoon was going to be online tutoring. So there were no performing arts, no athletics. It was just these math, reading, social studies, and science courses in the morning, and then they would leave before lunch because they didn't want them socializing at lunch. And that was terrifying to me. But I have heard in other districts in the state of Washington that there have been several performing art teachers and athletic instructors that have just been furloughed, that they're just not meeting.
And in Michigan too, pretty early, like in May, I think they went ahead and decided, there were some districts in Michigan that were like, K through 12 fine arts, bye. We're not going to do that. And that's terrifying. So many of that is just really confusing too. Like, kids need consistency, which is why we're also fighting for the distance learning, because the reality is, okay, you want to go back, we'll go back, and then we're going to close down again. And then we're going to be in distance learning. And then you're going to fight to come back, and you want to go back. Okay, we're going to go back, and then we're going to close down again. And then it's going to be springtime, and we're still going to be juggling this pandemic because we can't stay in this safe distance learning that's actually working. For us, like I said, at our district, like, each campus gets to do their own thing. So you have some campuses that are holding the kids in the class all day, no rotating. They just sit, distance learn from their laptops. And then for our campus, they're rotating. They have lunch. They're going to be in the lunchroom. They're rotating from class to class. And I will juggle my kids in person as well as my kids on the Zoom, which that terrifies me when it comes to accountability, because Zoom has shown to have its flaws, like everything does. And especially in our district, there's been just so many Zoom bombings of kids hopping on there, being profane, showing pornographic images. I mean, it's been terrifying. And if that happened to me as a teacher, I would just freak out. And here I am, kids on a Zoom, kids in my classroom, making sure, okay, you can't be around each other. You have to stay there. You have to wear your mask. How am I going to be accountable for both? Because, unless this is what I do, and this is what I've considered, I just hate the idea is, you're here. I love that you're here. I'm going to be at my desk. You're going to be on your laptop, and we're doing class as is. And then we rotate to the next class, and we're doing class as a Zoom, because I have to serve those kids in distance learning too. There isn't an extra teacher that's going to do that for me. Some campuses have that flexibility. Some subjects have that flexibility. I, unfortunately, and a lot of other people do not. So it's just going to be I talked to my private instructor because, we still have private master classes via Zoom for our kids. And I tell him, hey, 'tis the season for trial and error. And let's just pray to God that that error doesn't include COVID infection or termination of a job.
Well, and we need to be doing something. I had a great opportunity to connect with a new colleague in Washington. I think it was last week or the week before. And we were talking about the success of possibilities, just trying something that is possible. That's success. Celebrate the fact that you did something rather than nothing. And I want to get,
Yes.
hopefully not too preachy, but I've been frustrated by people that aren't making the appropriate distinctions in this online learning, because I heard someone in sort of conversation in the wind of like, well, teachers should be prepared for this because you should know how to differentiate. And I want to set the record straight. There's a distinction between differentiation and modes of learning. Learning online is a completely different modality of learning. It's a completely different form of engagement. And it has never been one of the options for accommodations or differentiation. So and forgive me, it's just the way you had said it, I was reminded of that conversation and it really frustrated me. And I know that some people, their eyes go cross, because I would agree there's so much educational jargon and it can be hard to keep track of. But trying to, and putting it in different words, and trying to serve every student, which every teacher should be doing every day, and trying to serve every student, this idea that, oh, I can have people in the room, I'm going to have people online, and it's going to somehow end up equitable, is just completely misinformed. Because teaching online, as so many of us have learned, and I'm counting myself in that, as I have learned, teaching online is radically different. It's a completely different modality. It's a different form of management. It's a different form of curriculum and engagement. It's totally different. It's a different way of teaching. So I can't just, I have to practice differentiational skills while teaching online just as much as I have to do in person. And I'm trying to learn what those look like to serve my students best as I'm trying to also teach it. So the idea, I'm actually doing that. I'm in this boat with you. I have one of the things that I learned, and I actually support this. So for all of my SPU colleagues that are watching, I'm actually not going to talk trash about SPU. I've been so grateful for how my school has handled things. But one of the things that took me by surprise, we had the option to teach in person or online. And so I chose to teach most of my classes in person. I thought that it would be the best way to facilitate the content. So we're practicing social distancing. I have a mask and a shield, and I have, so I'm doing the things that I need to do to keep my students safe and keep myself safe. So I went through all that training and prepared to do that. Well, in terms of equity, and this frustrated me at first, in terms of equity, they said some of our students do not want to be on campus. They don't feel safe, and we are not going to penalize them for making that decision. So you have to be able to provide online teaching as well as in-person teaching, because the student that doesn't feel safe, they have the choice not to be here, but that doesn't mean they have to choose not to learn. And at first I was like, well, that's not fair. I should be able to choose just one. And thought, no, I need to take this as a sincere challenge, and I need to find a way to do that. So I have, in particular, the orchestra that I conduct. I have a group of students that have chosen to be on campus, and we're going to be rehearsing, practicing social distancing, the aerosol studies that came out of Boulder. Like, we're using all of that to figure out how we can practice and what it'll look like. But I have a group of students, a cohort of students that will only be participating online. And college is a little different because they're literally in another state. So like they're choosing not to move back to Seattle for school. So like they literally can't be there in person. And I'm, just like you, like I'm experimenting with how can I keep them engaged? How can I make them feel included, but also deal with the people that are in front of me in the scope of making music, that I have people in front of me. I want to rehearse with them and make music, but I also have these people that are online. And so I'm developing some strategies. I definitely don't have the answers, but I do have some solutions. And that is, we're already past an hour, which blows my mind. I love talking with you. I can't believe the time goes so fast. But that's what I want to add for anyone that has been listening to this conversation, or people that might be viewing it in the playlist on YouTube. This really isn't about, and I told this to someone the other day, this is not about creating answers. It's about finding and trying solutions. And I think we need to shift our mindset to that I'm not trying to solve the problem. I'm trying to address a concern. And there isn't one, there's not one way to fix it, quote unquote. And of course it would be magical if there was. It's not just using Zoom. It's not just using Teams. It's not just creating the virtual ensembles. It's not any of those things. It has to be specific to your program, to your community, to your students. For some of the programs I've seen, they're doing virtual ensembles. They're thriving. They're loving it. It's this new form of engagement, and it works in their community. That's awesome. But in other areas where there is a lack of technological resources or time becomes an issue, one of the things I hadn't considered when my students went back home in the spring, we did this virtual ensemble thing, and a lot of them were then at home with their families, their extended families, and they had no time to record. There was never a quiet moment. They didn't have a room to themselves, so they would have to record it like midnight in a tool shed. Like, there are those realities that we don't consider. So success right now should not equal creating a virtual product. Success right now should not equal anything other than what serves and works best for your students. And I want everybody to know that. We're talking about a lot of things, and I literally could talk to Franchesca all day about what should and what could be happening, because there are so many more possibilities than there are dead ends at this point. But nothing that we're saying is the answer. These are all just solutions to the challenges that we're facing.
And I just want to add, grades are not the answer at all. In my personal opinion, grades are not the answer. It's like whose line is it anyways? Like,
If
I'll make
teaching looks different, assessment has to look different, period.
yes. Yet we're still having it. And, I think that's going to come down to educators, music educators with the UIL and the core educators with STAR to, again, just, I think that might just be the personal choice of like, what is important to you, getting the typical assessment results or engaging your students at their level. And right now, the most important thing is engaging the student at their level in the
Amen.
social emotional learning. So they need it. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Franchesca, I hope we connect again. I'm wishing you Godspeed and praying for everybody that's returning to the classroom this week. I go back on the 14th. It'll be my first day on campus, and just thinking about everyone, I want to reiterate again, don't end the conversations. Keep them going. This is a time to stay communicated and connected, whether you're doing it virtually or in person. Keep conversations going.
And bridge those relationships that
Yes.
may be divided or skewed. We're all fighting the same thing.
We need each other. I said this a whole bunch in some of the posts I was making this past quarter. Practicing social distancing responsibly, which we all should be doing. Physically distancing ourselves does not mean that we have to distance ourselves emotionally or spiritually or intellectually. So I'm so grateful for your time and everyone that has been a part of this. Thank you for the praise and comments that have been on the live stream. This is not just a conversation between two people. This is about all educators and artists that are out there trying to find solutions to their challenges. Stay connected. Keep talking. Practice social distancing, but stay connected. There's a distinction, an important distinction to be made in that regard. Again, Franchesca, thank you so much for your time. If you stay on, I want to say a formal goodbye to you. But for everybody else that was watching, thank you for tuning in. Again, this conversation will be archived on our YouTube playlist. Please feel free to share it and any other conversations that you think are worthwhile. And don't just listen. Think about the things that are talked about, and then reach out to us. Send us a message through social media, or you can email me and I can connect you with guests that we might have had. But keep the conversations going. This is meant to create dialogue, not to offer any answers to problems that you might be facing. So thank you to everyone that has been supporting these teacher talks. And thank you again to Franchesca. I hope you all have a safe return and are able to serve your students and your communities to meet all of their needs. Everything that's going on right now. We'll talk to you guys soon.